So now we're getting ready to glue these two parts together. I've got my Elmer's Pro Bond glue, and it's a very messy process, so I'm not going to show it on the camera because I end up with with glue all over my hands, and I can't control the camera without getting it messy. But I can certainly show you how I do it. I have a bunch of these small clamps. I got them at a dollar store years ago. Didn't use them for many years until all of a sudden I started making lures, and now they're indispensable. So I'll be using them. I have 4 of them, and I'll be putting them across the entire lure. So what you do is you put glue all around the edges, and make sure you have enough glue but not too much glue, and that's about as accurate as I can tell you. And I use my finger I put beads of glue, and then I work it around with my finger. And you should have a box of Kleenex close to you, because what's going to happen is as you spread this glue around in all of the different places, you're going to turn it upside down and you're going to put it in place. So once you do that, a couple things are going to happen. You're going to have glue squishing out all of the joints, maybe not all of them, but a fair bit. So you're going to want to use the Kleenex to clean that off. And another thing that's going to happen is as you clamp it, you're going to put pressure on the two halves, and sometimes they'll slip apart. I'll exaggerate it here, you can see it. Slip apart like that, or on the tail. And one of the absolute things you must do at this stage, this is an absolute must, is you must have these things dead even, front and back. And when you're clamping them, you're not, bear in mind, this is a shell. It's got a big hole in the center. It's not tough like a piece of oak or something like that, where you can just clamp it and crank those clamps till you can't crank it anymore. So the pressure that you put on here should be firm but not crushing. And you'll start in the center here with your clamps here and here, and then you'll move to the head. All the while you're checking the fit, checking the fit, checking the fit. And then the final one is going to be on the tail. Now the tail is always an awkward one. And when you put some pressure here, it moves a little bit, and you got to move it back. That's why you get glue all over your hands. It's just impossible to not get it. And as you're putting on these clamps and it getting tighter and tighter, more and more glue will pull out, and you'll want to, of course, clean up as much as you can. The glue, when it's hardened, is like a heavy rubber. It's relatively hard, and it does actually cause some sanding problems, but I'll get into that later. So I'm going to stop the video here, glue it, and come back after several hours and take off the clamps. This is what it looks like when it's all clamped up. And you'll leave that for minimum 30 minutes. I usually leave it overnight. And I try to make sure to get rid of any excess glue, because the glue is somewhat difficult to sand, and sometimes you have to kind of work pretty hard at getting rid of it. Okay, so we're back. The clamps are going to come off now. The glue is dry. In about 12 hours since I glued it, but the honest truth is I have poured lead as quickly as 1 hour after I glued it. So I'm going to have a look at the lure now. You can see a bit of glue on top that's going to have to get sanded off. But one of the most important things, as I mentioned previously, is to make sure that when you glue the two halves together, it's a perfect fit. And this is a perfect fit. Both, you can see that at the ends, because if it's not perfect at the ends, it cannot be perfect along the lines. The contours just simply won't match. So on this lure, we are ready to get it ready to pour lead. And what I mean by that is I have to straighten out these the belly loop and the loop, the attachment loop where you put your line on. Don't have to worry so much about this tail loop. That always takes a little bit of correction towards the very end, and you'll do that just before you pour a 5-minute epoxy in here. So all of these holes, this guy, this one, and this one, will have epoxy dribbled in one at a time, and it will harden, and then I will trim it with a knife first, because that's if you do it within 24 hours, you can actually cut it, which is much better than sanding. So after a while, maybe another day, anything else I can actually sand down to where I need it. So now I thought I would have a little discussion on this tail loop. This tail loop, notice that you have the loop and it goes directly into the wood, and you saw the previous videos on how the loops were made, and they had that turnaround. So the question is, do I have to split the lure? So I was going to show you some examples of two lures that were made within just a few months of each other. They look relatively similar color. These loops are in the front, and of course the belly hook. So the important thing to look at here is the ends. So the one on the right, if I was to take a lure, make a loop, and stick it through that channel, I could catch this loop in the center and hold it and glue it, and it would be just fine. The problem is, what do you do at the end? So basically, this thing has a piece of wire sticking out of it like this. So you're kind of limited to what you can do. You can make the loop, the wire has to be in the lure, because once you make this wraparound, it can't come out. So you're really kind of stuck. So this lure was made in one piece, and the back is absolutely perfect. It's beautiful. You can see it there in the light, and there's no reason to think that anything else has been done with this lure. So some of the advantages of using a solid piece rather than splitting it is the back turns out absolutely perfect, because there's no joining there. There's nothing to cause it any grief whatsoever. So this lure has been split. That wraparound has been hidden inside the lure, and I personally like this much better. So even though that these two lures were made literally within months of each other, once I started to split the lure and put that wraparound inside, I never went back. So I was going to go through a few advantages of splitting the lure like this guy. One of them is that you can actually, as we saw in some of the videos, take out material, and you can get more lead in a lure like this than a lure that has not been split. Now this one has its lead in a different way. I drilled holes here and I installed lead. This one weighs 170 grams. a lot of that weight is the wood because it's quite a large lure. This one as well is 157 grams. And although it's very hard to tell, I believe this one also has the holes in it. So this was back probably 2 years. Not a bad looking lure, a little chubby perhaps. I want to put him on a diet next time I make him. So you can actually put more lead in this guy. Now, for wahoo fishing, more lead means more depth. More depth means closer to the fish. Perhaps an ideal depth would be 30 to 50 feet down. You saw a picture, or you saw a video with a deep diver with a big bill on it. That certainly gets down. Now, another wonderful thing about this split, you saw how we dug out each side and then we put them together. And the intention was, we weighed both sides with the electronic scale to make sure that the lead was as even as possible left or right. So it was poured on the center line. So that improves the balance of the lure. When you're doing one like this and drilling holes, if you are drilling that hole and you tilt it just slightly during the drilling process, that lead will be off center. So that's another one of the advantages of splitting the lure. And of course, the obvious one is that there's no outside wrap required for the tail hook. Now, a couple of disadvantages of this, and I can show it to you right here, is you have a glue line. So when you have a glue line, you have a softer material, then you have the glue, and then the softer material again. So your instincts will be to sand this way, because we're always taught that sanding with the grain is better than sanding across the grain. So what happens when you're using something like 80 grit? Because that glue is actually harder than the wood, there's going to be a little line all the way across here that comes up, and the glue will get higher than the wood. And what you're forced to do is you're forced to sand sideways to get that off. Now, later when you're up to grits, say 200 and above, you can sand this way, and the grit is organized so tightly that you won't bring that glue line up. You saw me in the previous video putting these two halves together. Now, that's more difficult than it looks, and it's got to be perfect. If these sides have a tendency to want to move even after they're clamped, so it's kind of like gluing two halves of an eggshell together. It's quite difficult. So now, of course, what you've got, it looks like a very big, vigorous hook, but it's hollow. And the only thing that makes this a tough hook will be the addition of the lead. So that's why I almost exclusively now use the splitting technique, and then I dig out where the lead goes, and this hole here will disappear totally. You will never know that it's here. And that's why I use the splitting method, because it has more advantages than disadvantages.